Welcome back to Starz Recapped, the place where we break down movies faster than Leito can jump across rooftops. Today, we're diving into the adrenaline-pumping, wall-jumping world of District 13, the 2004 French action masterpiece that brought parkour into the cinematic spotlight. Set in a lawless future Paris, where the government walls off dangerous neighborhoods and crime runs wild, we follow a fearless traceur and a tough undercover cop on a race against time to stop a deadly weapon from destroying the city. Buckle up, because in District 13, the streets fight back, and gravity is just a suggestion. In the near future, there's a sector of Paris where chaos rules the streets. No schools, no mail service, and the last police outpost is on the verge of shutting down for good. With no law to keep order, the area has turned into a stronghold for ruthless gangs and powerful drug lords. Government's answer? Build a colossal wall to lock it away from the rest of the city, cutting it off from the outside world entirely. Inside, the air is thick with crime, violence, and corruption. Yet one man refuses to be corrupted. His name is Leito. Driven by a sense of justice, he has no part in the illegal trade. In fact, he's the nightmare of every crime boss, poisoning his neighborhood with the deadly drug they peddle. One afternoon, the towering enforcer known as K2 showed up at Leito's apartment building. Two of his armed henchmen instantly aimed their guns straight at Leito's head. K2, completely unfazed, gave a cold, mocking smile and barked. Do you have any idea who you're dealing with? In the blink of an eye, he lunged forward and snapped both of the gunmen's necks without a moment's hesitation. Earlier that day, Leito had intercepted a major drug shipment belonging to Taha, the crime lord who ruled the district. The haul contained a staggering 20 kilos of deadly powder, and Leito's only goal was to make sure it was destroyed. Acting on Taha's orders, K2 mobilized a small army of thugs to track him down. Known for his brutality and total disregard for human life, K2 wasn't the kind of man anyone wanted to cross. As the sound of gunfire echoed through the halls, Leito realized the danger closing in and quickly tried to send the contraband far from the area. Moments later, K2's crew burst into the room, but Leito was ready. He launched himself into the fight, risking everything in a desperate clash. K2 wanted him alive, so he ordered his men to hold their fire. In a split second, Leito sprang into action, unleashing a flurry of precise martial arts strikes. Moving with lightning speed, he slipped past his attackers and burst out of the building just in time. Vaulting across narrow gaps and leaping from one floor to another, he made his way from rooftop to rooftop. Those foolish enough to chase him were quickly dealt with, often with a few extra blows for good measure. Scaling a fire escape, he propelled himself upward and landed on the roof. With a clean somersault, he cleared the gap to the next building, leaving his pursuers gaping from below. Despite bringing a small army, K2 returned empty-handed, the failed mission weighing heavily on the crew. None dared imagine Taha's reaction. The crime boss was livid, €1,000,000 worth of drugs gone, and his anger was deadly. One by one, he executed several of the men as payment for their failure. Only K2's quick thinking saved him. With a sly grin, he reminded Taha that Leito had a younger sister, Lola. If they could grab her, they could draw Leito into a trap. Taha agreed, but with a cold warning, fail again and don't bother coming back alive. Without wasting time, K2 marched his men straight to the supermarket where Lola worked. In the middle of the day, he dragged her away in full view of the public. But the onlookers didn't lift a finger. In District 13, gangster brutality was just another part of daily life. The police did nothing, frozen in place like lifeless statues, unwilling to stir up trouble with the district's most dangerous gang. K2 wasted no time and delivered Lola straight to the gang's main stronghold, a fortress so heavily secured that even an insect would struggle to slip inside. Within its walls, illegal goods were processed and distributed openly, as casually as running a market stall. The deeper one went, the clearer it became that Taha kept a personal army of lethal enforcers, each ready to kill at his command. When Lola was brought before K2, she surprised everyone by lashing out, raking her nails across his hand. The sudden pain sent K2 into a rage, and he dragged her to face Taha himself. Orders were given to spread word across the district, bait to draw Leito straight into their trap. This time, they were certain they'd catch him, but plans don't always go as expected. While Taha was savoring his anticipated victory, Leito dropped from above like a shadow from the heavens, pressing a cold blade to the crime lord's throat. In one swift move, he had Taha as his hostage. With the boss in tow, Leito walked out side by side with Lola, defying the 100 gun barrels aimed directly at them. Even K2, usually full of swagger, was left humiliated and silent. So shaken, he was forced to strip down to his underwear without uttering a word. Seizing their moment, the siblings broke through the gang's blockade, shoved Taha into a vehicle, and sped off toward the nearest police station. Even under a hail of gunfire, Leito forced his way inside, dragging the gang boss with him. Alongside the captive, he brought 5 kilos of narcotics as proof of Taha's crimes. But the victory was short-lived. Within minutes, the station was surrounded by Taha's heavily armed men, the tension in the air thick enough to choke on. Fearing the building would be reduced to rubble, the police inspector made a disgraceful choice. He had Leito arrested, letting Taha walk free. In that moment, the man fighting to clean up his home was thrown into a cell, while the crime lord strolled away untouched. To make matters worse, Taha reclaimed the drugs and dragged Lola off right in front of everyone. Helpless, Leito could do nothing but grit his teeth and seethe at the corruption around him. The inspector muttered an apology, claiming he was about to retire and couldn't afford more trouble. To Leito, it wasn't caution, it was cowardice in its purest form. Months slipped by in uneasy silence. Half a year later, Leito remained behind bars. Day after day, he pushed his body to the limit, building his strength and sharpening his skills for the moment he could break free and rescue his sister. The bitter truth was hard to swallow. The man fighting for justice was trapped in a cell, while Taha and his gang roamed the streets unchecked. Lola's life had become a nightmare. Taha used her as a pawn for his cruelty, a means to vent his rage. His criminal network grew bolder, reaching beyond the district to spread its grip into other cities, making the streets even more dangerous. Then came the heist. One afternoon, his crew ambushed an armored security truck. Using 2 street kids, they smeared soap across the windshield, blinding the driver long enough for the gang to plant an explosive charge. The blast ripped the door open, and in moments, the vehicle was theirs. Back at their hideout, the criminals tore into the cargo bay expecting stacks of cash. But instead, they found something far deadlier, a high-grade military warhead from a nuclear program. In fumbling with it, Taha unknowingly triggered the device. Now the countdown had begun. In less than 24 hours, District 13 faced total annihilation. When the alarming news reached the Ministry of Defense, action was taken without delay. The minister called in Damien, a veteran in bomb disposal, assigning him a mission with no margin for error: disarm the warhead, and save the 2 million lives trapped inside District 13. Unbeknownst to most, the gang's ranks already hid a deep cover officer, planted to investigate their gambling and money laundering operations. But the cover didn't last. Surveillance footage tipped the criminals off to the mole's existence, igniting a level of paranoia and violence unlike anything seen before. The gang leader, on edge and convinced someone was betraying him, snapped. He pulled his gun and shot one of his own men in cold blood, desperate to flush out the spy. Amid the chaos, Damien's identity was exposed. What the boss didn't realize was that Damien had already set the board in his favor. In a sudden reversal, he overpowered the leader, using him as a human shield to force the others back. Sealing the door behind them, Damien coordinated with the police above ground to secure custody of the crime boss. But things didn't go according to plan. After waiting in vain for his team to lower a rescue cable, Damien was forced to fight his own way out. Surrounded by armed thugs, he tore through them with the precision of a seasoned warrior. Gunfire erupted like a thunderstorm, bullets cutting the air inches from him, but Damien's reflexes were razor sharp. Calm under fire, he slipped past every shot and dismantled the attackers one after another, leaving the once confident mob scattered and broken. The gang never realized they were up against an elite operative, a professional whose skill level was far beyond anything they could imagine. By the time the fight ended, not a single opponent was left standing. Only then did Damien's backup team arrive, too late to do more than secure the scene. The mission was complete. Upon returning, Damien was met personally by the Minister of Defense. This time, the task ahead was even more critical. With just 23 hours left to disarm the nuclear device and save the 2 million residents of District 13. It was a nightmare scenario. The district was a powder keg, more armed to the teeth than supplied with basic necessities, and stepping inside was like walking into a predator's lair. Knowing the dangers, Damien's superior had already arranged for him to work with someone who knew the area better than anyone: Leito. a man born and raised in the district. There was only one problem. Leito was in prison, serving time, and carried a deep resentment toward the police. Convincing him to join the mission would be just as difficult as surviving the mission itself. To win Leito's cooperation, Damien devised a clever deception. He posed as a battered inmate, supposedly roughed up by the police, and arranged to be placed in the same prison transport as him. Playing the part, Damien told Leito he'd been locked up after killing one of Taha's men in a botched deal, and now all he wanted was to escape and take revenge. The moment the story was told, Damien sprang into action, snapping the lock on the van's rear door and lunging for the driver's seat. The two guards were overpowered in seconds, and the van roared toward District 13. Ignoring the shouts behind them, Damien slammed the accelerator, smashing through the security checkpoint without hesitation. Then, without warning, Leito went quiet. A second later, Damien felt the cold bite of figure-8 handcuffs locking his wrist to the steering wheel. Leito had seen through the act from the beginning. He knew Damien was an undercover cop and had no intention of being used. With an icy glare, he told Damien he'd rescue his sister on his own, then slipped out of the van and disappeared into the streets he knew like the back of his hand. Left behind and seething, Damien barely had time to think before more gang members appeared. In District 13, danger often came wearing a smile, friendly faces masking the fact that, just out of sight, there was always a weapon aimed at your head. What the gang hadn't counted on was Damien's ability to turn even a handicap into an advantage. Still cuffed to the steering wheel, he used it as an improvised weapon, twisting it to overpower a thug and drag him in as a human shield, clearing the first hurdle of his dangerous mission. Though he didn't know the district's maze-like streets, Damien's instincts were razor-sharp. It didn't take long for him to track down Leito's hideout. When he found him, he tossed the figure-8 cuffs back as a silent gesture that he wasn't there to start a fight. Curious, Damien asked how Leito had seen through his disguise so quickly. With a knowing grin, Leito replied that his combat form and footwork gave him away instantly, the mark of a trained agent, not a street criminal. With his cover blown, Damien laid his cards on the table. He explained that his only reason for deceiving Leito was to secure a chance to stop the nuclear device in Taha's possession, a bomb capable of wiping the entire district off the map and plunging the city into chaos. Hearing this, Leito's sense of justice took over. Pushing past his resentment toward the police, he extended his hand to Damien. In that moment, the two men set aside their differences and became unlikely partners in a fight to save millions. Damien's plan was simple: have Leito guide him to Taha's hideout so he could slip inside, disable the detonator, and rescue Lola. But instead of sneaking around, Leito pulled out his phone and called Taha directly. He told the crime boss that he'd be coming in person, bringing an agent to discuss the bomb. Damien objected, worried the direct approach would blow their cover, but Leito understood Taha too well. The man's greed and curiosity were stronger than his caution. He'd want to see them face to face rather than kill them on sight. As expected, Taha's men arrived within minutes, escorting both of them to the gang's stronghold without raising suspicion. What no one there realized was that the clock was ticking. Barely an hour remained before the device would detonate, erasing District 13 from the map. When they stood before him, Damien told Taha bluntly that he was the only one who could stop the bomb. Without his help, not just the 2 million people in the district, but he himself would be buried in the blast. Taha only smirked. He claimed it didn't matter. He had already arranged a mobile platform to move the warhead and target any city he desired. As if that weren't enough, Taha unveiled a massive enforcer, a towering killer locked in a cell, now released to guard the bomb. Anyone who tried to get close would be crushed instantly. Then, with the arrogance of a businessman holding all the cards, Taha made his offer: pay him $20 million, and he'd consider letting them walk away alive. With no better option, Damien pretended to phone his superiors, acting as though he was arranging the transfer of Taha's ransom. Moments later, he confidently claimed the payment had gone through. Suspicious, Taha checked his account, only to be told by the bank that it would take another 30 minutes to process. That delay gave Damien and Leito a precious sliver of time. Realizing they couldn't waste another second, Leito sprang into action. Launching into a flawless spinning flip, he and Damien dove into the nearby washroom. With practiced precision, Leito ripped open a ceiling panel, creating a narrow escape route to the floor below. Gunfire erupted as the gang's bullets tore through the air, but the two managed to slip away unscathed. When word reached Taha that his captives had escaped, his temper exploded. In a fit of rage, he shot one of his own men on the spot. But his fury only grew when a second piece of bad news arrived. The ransom money had never been sent, and every one of his bank accounts had been frozen. In an instant, the man who once controlled millions was broke. In District 13, wealth and brute force are the only currencies that matter. With his fortune gone, Taha's authority crumbled. The resentment his men had been hiding finally boiled over. Turning on him, they delivered their former boss to a rival crime syndicate, a feared mafia outfit led by two heavily tattooed figures eager to claim their new prize. Over the course of a single night, Taha's reign collapsed. The once feared ruler of District 13 was stripped of power, and the seat of control was quickly claimed by a new figure who wasted no time proclaiming himself the district's next kingpin. Unlike Taha, the fresh leadership wasn't reckless enough to destroy their most valuable asset, the deadly bomb. Instead, they focused their efforts on eliminating Damien and Leito, sending out crews to hunt them down. Knowing every rooftop, ladder, and narrow passage like the lines of his own palm, Leito raced across the skyline with ease, treating sloped tiles as if they were level ground. Damien, however, was a stranger here, forced into an exhausting chase through unfamiliar streets that felt more like a punishing marathon. District 13 had always carried a grim reputation, easy to enter, almost impossible to leave. Even the military had tried to take control once, and failed. Now, two men with no weapons were facing the same unforgiving maze. Meanwhile, high above the streets, Leito moved like a man putting on a show for the entire world. His parkour mastery was unmatched. Each leap, vault, and spin flowed seamlessly into the next, wasting no energy. With every graceful movement, he widened the gap between himself and the thugs chasing him, leaving the new crime boss's men struggling far behind. Speed alone couldn't save them. Before long, the pair found themselves hemmed in from all directions. Just as it looked like the end, K2 unexpectedly emerged. Instead of blocking their path, he urged them to hurry and defuse the bomb. Damien blinked in disbelief, only for K2 to shrug and say, "If you're not running, why would we bother chasing you?" Damien shot back without missing a beat. "If you're not chasing, why would we bother running?" The odd exchange briefly lightened the mood, but the ticking clock refused to slow. With just 9 minutes remaining, the two men charged toward the upper floor where the bomb was kept, only to be confronted by a hulking enforcer, easily tipping the scales at 300 kilos. This was Taha's parting gift, a living wall between them and the explosive. Damien lunged first, but against such sheer brute force, he was hopelessly outmatched, battered to the ground within moments. Then Leito made his move, not with raw strength, but with cunning. Spotting a heavy coil of electrical cable nearby, he combined it with his lightning-fast agility, turning his fluid movement into a clever, decisive attack. In one swift motion, Leo coiled the electrical cable around the towering brute, binding him so tightly he could no longer move. His massive frame toppled like a felled tree, limbs dangling uselessly as if they belonged to a broken puppet. Seizing the moment, Damien summoned every ounce of strength left in him and delivered a decisive strike that sent the giant crashing into unconsciousness for good. On the upper level, Lola remained shackled, her eyes fixed on the chaos below. She shook with fear, yet her resolve was unshaken. Seeing her brother put his life on the line for her, she made a desperate decision. Using her foot, she tipped over a nearby container of fuel, then scraped a match to life, prepared to ignite the fire and end her own life before her brother had to pay the ultimate price. The small flame danced dangerously close to the spreading fuel when suddenly Leo burst in and stopped her just in time. Only 3 minutes remained before the devastating device would explode. The air felt heavy, as though time itself had frozen, every heartbeat ticking away toward the inevitable. With the tension mounting, Damien urgently contacted his commanding officer, demanding the shutdown code for the device. On the other end of the line, the official's expression turned unreadable before he calmly recited 9293B113. Without pausing to think, Damien keyed the sequence into the panel. But something about it made Leo's instincts flare. The combination felt too deliberate, too familiar. 9293B13, he muttered under his breath, realizing it matched the postal code of the district they were standing in. That wasn't just suspicious, it was alarming. He turned to Damien, his voice sharp. If the government really never intended to bring a bomb into this place, Why would the disarm code be the exact same as the district's address? This doesn't sound like a shutdown command, it sounds like a trigger. The idea hit like a punch. What if Damien's mission wasn't to save anyone at all, but to make sure the device exploded here? Damien dismissed it as pure coincidence, unwilling to believe such a betrayal. The argument escalated quickly, and soon words turned to blows. With years of elite training on his side, Damien began to overpower Leo in the fight. Leo might not have matched Damien's polished combat training, but his sheer determination kept him in the fight longer than expected. Still, Damien's skill and experience gradually pushed him back until he reached the control panel, ready to input the code. At that critical instant, Lola burst into the room. Tears streamed down her cheeks, but her gaze was unshakable. She stepped between them, trusting her brother with absolute conviction. The tension in the room was suffocating. No one spoke. Only the relentless ticking of the device filled the air. Then, in a moment that felt almost unreal, the timer froze. No blast, no destruction. Damien stood there stunned, relief and bitterness mixing as the truth began to sink in. He had been used. The three of them carried the weapon out of the building together. Strangely, none of the district's gangs tried to stop them. Instead, the crowd seemed to part, as if acknowledging their bravery. When they finally stood before Damien's commanding officer, both he and Leo leveled their threats, demanding answers. Under pressure, the official confessed the government had never planned to rescue District 13. In their eyes, the area was a blemish on the city, and the bomb was meant to erase it completely. The plan had been more sinister than anyone imagined. Once the bomb detonated, the government intended to pin the blame entirely on the gangs. The mass casualties would be spun as a necessary evil, giving the rest of society a false sense of safety. But that scheme collapsed instantly. Unbeknownst to the minister, a journalist had been filming the entire confession through a nearby window, broadcasting it live to the nation. Damien had set this up in advance, ensuring the truth could no longer be buried. With the conspiracy exposed, Damien and Leo eventually went their separate ways. Leo received a generous reward for his efforts, but instead of leaving, he chose to remain in District 13, a place scarred by violence and corruption, yet still his home. Damien remarked that the 2 million residents here needed a hero like Leo, but Leo shook his head with a faint smile, saying heroes weren't the answer. What the district truly needed were schools, hospitals, and honest law enforcement. He would stay, not as a savior, but as one of them, standing side by side with the people. And so, District 13 endured, unbroken and unforgotten. And that wraps up the explosive story of District 13, a tale of trust, betrayal, and the fight for justice in a place the world tried to erase. From death-defying parkour chases to political conspiracies, Leo and Damien proved that courage isn't just about fighting, it's about standing up for what's right, no matter the cost. If you enjoyed this breakdown, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe to Starz Recapped, and ring the bell so you never miss more thrilling movie explanations. Drop your thoughts about District 13 in the comments. Would you survive a day in this dangerous district? Until next time, this is Starz Recapped, bringing you the stories, the twists, and the endings that keep you hooked. See you in the next one.